Happy Monday! I hope today's book review will get you excited for a new read that you can add to your reading list or purchasing list. So, starting this week, I'm committing myself to publishing episodes every Monday and Friday. It's tough, but you know what? This is something that I love to do, and I really want to share my weekly reads with you guys and my thoughts on those reads. So, yes, that's our new schedule starting this week. So, I recently ordered some new books. I actually have several new books, but the two that I'm going to show you right now that I would be reviewing next week are Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. I'm so excited for this book. The book has a foreword by Angela Davis, which is great because I actually read one of her books. I think it was titled "Is Our Prisons Obsolete?" or something along those lines. But I remember reading her book, and that book was amazing. But yeah, so I purchased Walter Rodney, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa. This book has been on my purchasing list for quite some time. So when I ordered it, I was so excited to read it, and I actually still am. The book is brand new and has yet to be opened, but I am excited for this. So I'm going to read the synopsis to kind of give you like a little, insight into what next week's episode is going to look like. So, how Europe Underdeveloped Africa is an ambitious masterwork of political economy, detailing the impact of slavery and colonialism on the history of international capitalism. In this classic book, Rodney makes the unflinching case that African poverty is not a natural feature of geography or a consequence of culture, but a direct product of imperial extraction from the continents, a practice that continues into the present. Meticulously researched, How Europe Underdeveloped Africa remains an unshakably relevant study of the so-called Great Divergence between Africa and Europe, just as it remains a prescient resource for grasping the surge in global inequality today. In this new edition, Angela Davis offers a striking foreword to the book, exploring its lasting contribution to a revolutionary and feminist practice of anti-imperialism. So, yeah, I don't think I need to say much more. I'm so excited to read this book. I'm literally going to spend my entire day tomorrow to read it, and I'm excited. I'm excited to let you guys know what I think. And yeah, I know you guys have some time to get this book. So, when I'm giving this review, you're also adding to some thoughts while you're listening to my thoughts. So, yeah, let's see. I'm excited. Okay, so the second book that I purchased at Chapters, well, the second book, yes, the second book that I purchased at Chapters. I have this weird thing where like I stutter and like my words collide into each other. So if I do that, forgive me. This is a safe space, so please don't judge me. But the second book that I purchased is This Is Where the Serpent Lives by Danielle Muwindin. Now, so what led to this purchase? So when I was doing research on new releases and, just BIPOC books that may get my interest, I came across this one. And I know this has to do something with Pakistan. And this is a BIPOC book review channel. So I want to make sure that I'm reading books from different cultures and throughout different cultures. And this book was interesting at the time prior to me purchasing it. So let's see if I can find the synopsis. So let's see. Okay, so moving from Pakistan's dazzling, chaotic cities to a lawless, feudal countryside, This Is Where the Serpent Lives powerfully evokes contemporary feudal Pakistan, following the destinies of a dozen unforgettable characters whose lives are linked through violence and tragedy, triumph and love. Orphaned as a little boy and fending for himself in the city streets, Yazid rises to a place of responsibility and respect in the Lahore households of Colonel Attar, a powerful industrialist and politician, only to find that position threatened by conflicting loyalties and misplaced trust. Born on Colonel Attar's country estate to a poor gardener, Saqib is entrusted with the management of a pioneering business, but he overreaches and finds himself an outlaw, confronting the violence of the corrupt Punjab police. The colonel's son competes with his cherished brother for the love of a woman and discovers that her choice colors his life with unexpected darkness as well as light. In matters of power and money in the heart, Mizuddin's characters struggle to choose between paths that are moral and just and more worldly choices that allow them to survive in the system of caste, capital, and social power that so tightly grip their culture. Intimate and epic, elegiac and profoundly moving, This Is Where the Serpent Lives is a tour de force destined to become a class of contemporary literature. So, yeah, that's the synopsis of This Is Where the Serpent Lives. So both these books I'm extremely excited to read, and I'm excited to give my thoughts on these books. Yeah, my dog is like right next to me. She doesn't know when to leave me alone. She is like, I'm rice, she's white. We're white on rice. So yeah. So if you see my dog make a cameo, please forgive me. She's very sweet and she wouldn't harm anyone. So yeah, these are the two books that I'll be reviewing next week, and I'm so excited. I haven't been excited for two books in a very long time. Oh, and I also have two other books up there that I also purchased, but I'm not going to spotlight them yet. They'll be spotlighted in next week's episode. So yeah, I'm excited. These next two book reviews next week will be How Europe Underdeveloped Africa, and This Is Where the Serpent Lives. All right. What is the latest in publishing news? So, according to an article titled Venezuelan Opposition Leader Will Publish a Book in the US by Alexandra Alter, the Freedom Manifesto by Maria Corina Machado will lay out the Nobel laureate's vision for a new era, its publisher said. So according to Alexandra from the New York Times, publication was initially planned for February 3rd, but has been pushed back in order to add new material addressing the recent political upheaval, said Tony Lyons, the publisher of Skyhorse. So he adds that the house is rushing to get the book printed and into bookstores as soon as possible, and perhaps as early as next month. So, side note, I've already added this book to my reading list because I'm interested to see what this new era of Venezuela looks like, at least from the perspective of Maria Machado. Anyways, let's go back to Alexandra's commentary. So Machado, what's her name? Alexandra states that Machado argues that the Venezuelan government must guarantee its citizens the right to security, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly and association, and stresses that the country's private sector and economy needs to be rebuilt in a way that benefits citizens, according to the publisher's summary. And she also calls for the return of immigrants who have fled the country and for members of Maduro's government to be brought to justice for crimes against humanity. So, based on what I've read alone, one, I am very intrigued to know what this new era of Venezuela looks like. And I'm also very curious to know, whether or not, because she's speaking from a place of an opposition, but currently the lady that is running Venezuela's government was the former vice president under Maduro's leadership. Now, I don't really know much about Venezuelan politics. However, I do know that there's a chance that the current Venezuelan president may not stray too much from Majora's political agenda and political agenda. Let's just leave it there. So I'm very curious to see what is the intent. Is the intent of this book by Maria Machiato to urge Venezuelans to demand more for their own prosperity? Is it more to shun the current political landscape of Venezuela? Like, what is the intention, because to aspire to encourage immigrants to return to Venezuela, it's going to take more than a book and more than hopes and dreams. It's going to take a lot of work a lot of work, political work, and I'm curious to know whether or not Machiado is currently working to um, run against Maduro, or now the current vice president in the future, and whether or not Venezuelans currently have the same, values as Machiato. Because reading here, when Alexandra from the New York Times wrote that Machiato argues that the Venezuelan government must guarantee its citizens the right to security, freedom of expression, freedom of assembly, and association, and stresses that the country's private sector and economy needs to be rebuilt in a way that benefits citizens. To me, those are very basic things that a country should provide for its citizens. So I'm assuming that all Venezuelans share the same goals, and I'm assuming that the U.S. would only align with the current vice president of Venezuela if she too shared those same goals. So it'll be interesting to know whether or not the vice president of Venezuela, if her hopes and desires is strays from Machiato's hopes and desires, or if they are similar. If they're not similar, if Machiato and if sorry, what's her name? If Maria Machiato's vision for Venezuela strays from the current vice president's views and hopes for Venezuela, I feel like this book is great in hopefully sparking the mind of Venezuelans and really giving them, the courage to demand more, because from what I've learned about Venezuela, under the leadership of Maduro, they have suffered tremendously economically. So I feel like a lot of Venezuelans would want would want their country to, you know, improve their economical lives. And yeah, so let's just see what happens. But at the same time, given that the Americans have gone into Venezuela, it'll be interesting to see whether or not what transpires over over time, whether or not America will monopolize their entire oil industry, and whether or not that would have um, beneficial impacts for the Venezuelan people, or you know, the Venezuelan people continue to demand for their sovereignty and use the Freedom Manifesto by Maria Machiato to frame their demands of wanting more. So this is definitely very interesting. When I saw this published, I was excited because, one, I wasn't expecting um, a book like this to be published so soon after Maduro was taken from Venezuela. So we'll see. I'm excited to read and to see what her plans and aspirations are for the book. Um, yeah. But from what I got from this, I believe that she is currently living in the US, from what I've come to learn. However, don't take that as fact. But so, yeah. However, but another thing too is that which is weird. Well, not really weird, but so in the article by Alexandra Alter, she states that in the aftermath of Maduro's ouster, Maciaro has been excluded from the Trump administration's plans. Speaking on Saturday, Trump was dismissive of her ability to lead a political transition in Venezuela. He states that she doesn't have the support within or the respect within the country. He told reporters at a news conference at Mar-a-Lago. So the Trump administration has instead thrown its support behind Delcy Rodriguez, who was Maduro's vice president and is now serving as the country's acting president. So, I don't know, because the U.S. gone in there with the, at least they told the American public that they went into Venezuela because the Venezuelans were living under harsh conditions under the Maduro government, but the vice president likely is not going to stray in her policies and her political and economical agendas, and to not support and endorse an opposition candidates, namely Maria Maciaro, who believes in the freedom of expression, the freedom of assembly, who believes that the economic conditions of the Venezuelan people should be improved. That is a little suspect to me, and now I'm beginning to question the intentions of the US. So we'll see. Regardless, I'm not going to get too much into geopolitics. That's not what this podcast is about. This podcast is about books and BIPOC books, and I'm interested to see what Maria Maciaro has to say and what her vision is for the Venezuelan people. I hope that my fellow Venezuelans pre-order the book because it'll be interesting. It's because this is going to help us frame what is needed to be demanded for, especially given that the U.S. is now taking charge of of the country, and these are things that the Venezuelans. Hopefully, her book, The Freedom Manifesto, will give Venezuelans the language that is needed to demand better economic conditions, better social conditions, better health and safety conditions. So this is going to be a very interesting book, I would say, for the beginning of the year, at least for me, because it's so current, and yeah, it'll be very interesting to see and interesting to read. So I definitely added on my reading list. I feel like you should too, and I feel like this is a conversation that I'm really looking forward to having in terms of reviewing the book and really seeing how it aligns with the US's values, and why, and really determine why, if both values align, why hasn't Trump or the US government supported her, or at least tried to support her. So this is something that I'm interested in reading, and I hope you are too. Yeah, this is going to be a great one. So we're both going to add it to our reading list. So before we get into today's book review, I want to give information on Cheikh Anta Diop. And once I give some information on who he is, then we're going to get into today's book review. I feel like giving background info on him, it will be a great way to kind of transition into the book review and for you to really understand the purpose of why he wrote the book. So let's start with who Cheikh Anta Diop is. So Cheikh Anta Diop is a Senegalese historian, anthropologist, physicist, and politician. He's known for his work on the origins of the human race and pre-colonial African culture. So Diop's work is instrumental in Afrocentricity. So you're probably asking yourself, and most likely the majority of my audience, or maybe no one in my audience knows what Afrocentricity is, so I'm going to explain to you. So Afrocentricity is a worldview and academic framework that centers African people, their history, their culture, and values as the primary lens for understanding the world, challenging Eurocentric perspectives that have historically marginalized Black experiences. So, the historical importance of this is to counter distorted European narratives by highlighting African achievements and contributions to world civilizations, often starting from ancient Egypt. So, founded in 1887 to 1940 by Marcus Garvey, the Afrocentric movement was founded by the Jamaican-born Marcus Garvey. I just So Marcus Garvey focused on Pan-Africanism, racial pride, economic self-reliance, and political reparation to Africa. So, however, years after the Pan-Africanism movement led by Marcus Garvey, Cheikh Anta Diop provided scientific validation for the ideas that Garvey championed by proving through anthropology and history that ancient Egyptian civilization was founded by Black Africans. In addition to this, the purpose of the book PreColonial Black Africa is to challenge the European narratives of Africa. So now that I've given you some information on Cheikh Anta Diop, what inspired his work on pre-colonial Africa, the history of Africa, the origins of civilization, now we can really get into the book review, Pre-Colonial Black Africa. So before reading Pre-Colonial Black Africa, I can be completely honest with you, I didn't know what to expect, right? I didn't know a lot about Africa. I am African, obviously I'm Black. And I didn't know, all I knew as a Black individual was that since my parents are Jamaican, the reality was is that my ancestors were Ghanaian because a lot of the slaves that were taken over into the Caribbean came from Ghana. So that was to me the fundamental basis of my connection to Africa. I didn't know anything else about the continent. I didn't know anything else about where my ancestors like way back came from. And this book really gave me I would say a good understanding, at least a good basic understanding of the complexities of ancient Africa prior to European colonialism and what it looked like. So, and what it looked like. So, and it was also refreshing to know that because a lot of the books that I want to cover in my podcast, all of the books I want to cover in my podcast actually are going to be written by BIPOC writers. I have this weird thing about, Europeans telling Black stories and Black history. I'm not a fan of that because I feel like it can be written from a place of bias sometimes, and yeah, and I would prefer that, Black history be told by a Black person. And this is why I chose to get the book Pre-Colonial Black Africa by Cheikh Anta Diop, because it was necessary that if I'm going to learn about Africa and where my ancestors came from, it had to be from a Black person. So one of the main themes of this book is the economical, political, and social advancements of Africa, despite the narratives that are crafted by white supremacy. So Cheikh Anta Diop analyzes these three pillars, which is the social, economical, and political aspects of Canada through pre-colonial African empires. Now, like you, and maybe not like you, maybe you are privy to all of this, but I wasn't aware that there were so many empires in Africa. I obviously know the ancient Egyptian. I think the whole world knows that. I knew, yeah, what other empires have I known about? There hasn't been a lot of empires in Africa that I know about, and maybe you do. Maybe you're like reciting them as we speak, like all these different empires, but I didn't know that. So when I started reading this book and it automatically introduced me to all these empires, I was like, whoa, this was the amount of empires in Africa. And The whole time I was thinking, because the most publicized empire, in media today is just Egypt. So when I started learning about these empires, I was very like interested and wanted to learn more. So the empires that he focused on included the Songhai, the Mali, the Mossi, the Kayorian, and the Ghanaian Empire, to name a few. So for the purpose of this book, for the purpose of today's episode, because I don't want to give away too much of this book because I feel like it's a necessary read. I want you to get this book and read it, and it's a must read. Must read, especially if you don't know much about African history. But yeah. So get the book because I'm not going to tell you everything. So today's focus, we're going to focus on the Ghanaian Empire and the social, political, and economical advancements of this empire pre-colonial, prior to the Europeans um, colonizing Africa. So social. So in Western Africa, so it was known that in Timbuktu there were 150 to 180 schools, and these are schools that operated under Islam. So they taught kids how to speak the Quran, not speak the Quran, how to read the Quran, and and the advanced language of ancient Africa, according to this book, was Arabic. And the Islams had a heavy influence in ancient Africa. Um, Ancient Africa. So similar to Arabic being the advanced language of Africa, it was similar to Latin being the advanced language of Europe. In addition to this, the Quran was equivalent to the Bible in ancient Africa, which was also very interesting to learn. So in addition to this, a lot of Muslim Black Africa were commenting on Aristotle's formal logic and practicing dialects. Now, I didn't know that. I didn't know that the Quran was the equivalent of the Bible in ancient Africa. I didn't know that Islam had such a heavy presence in ancient Africa, and there were 140 to 180 schools in Timbuktu that were teaching kids how to read the Quran and to speak, Arabic. So that was very interesting to read. But what was more interesting to learn about ancient Africa was landscape of economic landscape of the Ghanaian Empire. So according to Cheikh Anta Diop, Africa was a place of abundance, and it currently is still a place of abundance, an exploited abundance, unfortunately, but it was and is a place of abundance. And people of pre-colonial Africa never experienced or never knew what it was to be poor. Poverty never existed um, in Africa. For example, in the book, Anta Diop states that the Emperor of Ghana, seated upon a platform of red gold, daily treated the people of his capital to 10,000 meals. Now, if we want to fast forward to Western society, poverty is a real thing, and it really has a lot to do with capitalism, which we're going to get into shortly, because he does speak about that too, and the reason why European civilization differentiated so much from African civilization, because capitalism wasn't a thing until the Europeans introduced it. So actually transitioning into that in ancient Africa, according to Anta Diop, nobility never looked at land as a form of commodity. So according to nobility in Africa, earth is a divinity. It's and this is Sheikh Diop's words. Earth is a divinity, It would be a sacrilege to appropriate any part of it. It only lends itself to our agricultural activity in order to make human life possible. And it's funny because we're all so connected. Because even after reading, the book, the indigenous book, what was it titled? As long as grass grows, they have the same belief where you don't own land. You don't own what the earth provides. You are simply a user of it. And that's all it is. You don't own anything. And it wasn't, however, this belief that no man owns land shifted after the Europeans have went into Africa and the Lebu of the Cape Verde Peninsula um, started practicing the concept of privately owned land. So after modern capitalism took form at the end of the 15th century, some domains of the Scottish Highlands would be trained into hunting forests for profit. So it's not until after the formation of capitalism when you begin to see Europeans using things coming from the earth as a form of profit. In the case of the Scottish Highlands, they turned their forest into hunting grounds, which was a form of revenue. However, this differed with African kings. The African king, however powerful, and this is Cheikh Diop's words, the African king, however powerful, was easily persuaded that the soil did not belong to him. This is especially applicable to immigrant kings. They easily accepted the sacred authority of the original occupants, even if the latter were presently without any material power. So, and as said by Sheck, and I also want to really put a lot of emphasis into what Sheck said. He said, instead of land having constituted a wealth beyond the reach of certain social categories, it was within everyone's grasp, with no need to forfeit one's freedom, like the serf bound to the soil in order to make use of it, to possess it. The slave had his own patch of ground. The stranger who just this morning came to the village would also get his. Expropriation of the sort seen in 16th century Europe was unthinkable in the history of pre-colonial Africa. So Africa never had the rural capitalist who was the farm owning acting as intermediary between the true owner of the soil and the expropriated agricultural wage earner. So, in other words, capitalism wasn't a thing where people had to work tirelessly to provide food for their family and, have a home to live in. Whatever was available by the planet was for everyone. And what's funny is because sometimes I have instances where I'm alone and I think to myself, I'm like, the system that we currently live in is so inhumane where, people are don't have enough to eat, people don't have nowhere to live, people are, you know, it's just these basic things that are necessary for survival, they place a price tag on. And it becomes you instead of living life and enjoying what the earth has, people become slaves to surviving and slaves to, getting basic needs like sleep, food, and shelter. So to really see how Western society, present day, compared to ancient Africa, it's very it's very demoralizing because you would think that as time progressed, and human lives have been proven. I mind you, like there are advancements in medicine and there are advancements in certain things, but regardless, you know, I just don't find capitalism to be something of a beneficial system for humanity. And we see it all the time. We see a lot of people, we see the haves and the have-nots, and we see the haves, you know, yeah. We see the haves and the have-nots. And to see that in ancient Africa, that the haves and the have-nots did not exist, everyone, mind you, everyone had their title, and there are certain luxuries associated with those titles. But regardless, people were able to live, in people were able to live, and people were able to survive and not have to worry about food and shelter. It really makes you think, like, whether or not the Western ideology of capitalism is something that present day humans should really continue to exist in and to continue to, fuel in. So ultimately, we all play a part in the system and we all keep the system going. But I think that once you read this book and really compare today's system to ancient systems, it may make you wonder, like, maybe we should go back to ancient times of living where we didn't have to, work tirelessly to provide for food and destroy the planet while providing for food, and we can be able to live a a great, healthier life. So, yeah, I think that was one of the main takeaways, at least in terms of the economical aspects of ancient Africa, that really stood out to me. And I think this book really makes me wish that hopefully humanity gets to the point where we say no to capitalism and we get to the point of society where people are communal, that we can be able to grow our own things and not have to worry about, like, oh, I own this and you own that. And it's just all this crap, like, sorry, all this stuff. I hope that, we are able to just live in a world where survival is not equal to how much you earn and how much you make. And, it's not associated with survival is not a commodity that you have to buy. And that's why I don't. That was my biggest takeaway, is that we're living in an era of Western ideology where survival is a commodity and you got to pay for it. You want to survive, you got to pay. Ancient Africa wasn't survival wasn't a commodity, it was a given. So just to summarize that. So that was one of the biggest takeaways for me. Maybe when you read this, you would have a different opinion. I don't know. I only know if you guys comment and let me know. But that was my takeaway from it. And yeah. So now we're going to get into the political landscape of Africa. So this to me was the most interesting. So in Africa, the political system varied from kingdom to from varied for each kingdom. So the Mossi Empire was a constitutional monarchy. So the Emperor Moranaba comes by hereditary from the family of the previous Moranaba, but he is chosen by an electoral college of 4 dignitaries presided over by the prime minister, the Tagonabo, as in Ethiopia. So Ethiopia had a very similar political landscape to the Mossi Empire, which is also very interesting to learn about as well. So in Ghana, the old African tradition, so in the Ghanaian Empire, sorry, the old African tradition was strictly observed. So secession was matrilineal. Only the empire and his heir apparent, which is his sister's son, would be the next in line. So, I mean, when I read this, I'm like, that's not really a bad idea. Because if the sister was having a son, there's really no questioning whether or not he shares the same bloodline. But but if the king was to decide that, he was going to have his wife give him a son who would be the heir, it can get a little tricky because, you know, there's no guarantee. You don't know if the female is, a cheater. I don't think she would be. Like, why would you cheat if you're with the king? But regardless, the only way to ensure that you know that the next here shares bloodline is from your sister's child makes the most sense in the world to me. Maybe I am biased because I'm a woman and you know, as a woman, I'm sure it'd be a nice thing to know that your kids are next in line and you are, the bearer of the future here. But I really feel like that's a very smart idea and it really, you know, protects protects the throne, protects the integrity of, the secession and that was also very interesting to know either. But I feel like that maybe came about maybe through heartbreak. I don't know. But or maybe it's just forward thinking why they, made their succession process as such. Who knows? But if it did come from heartbreak, I would love to know the history of that. That would be very interesting. So if someone were to ever, preferably Black producer, Black director, wanted to do a film on the Ghanaian Empire, please explore the origins of the matrilineal succession because I'm interested. That'd make a great drama. So yeah, so that was the political system in Ghana. Now, I also wanted to let you know that the Ghanaian Empire was whew, that the Ghanaian Empire was vast. And in my mind, I'm like, okay, so Africa had a vast empire that is never talked about, but whenever you think of Africa, they like to just throw Egypt in our face, like, oh, Egypt, Egypt, Egypt. Well, the Ghanaian Empire was vast. So the Ghanaian Empire basically controlled the gold trade in the Sahara Desert. And they also controlled, I believe, northern parts of Sudan or some parts of Sudan. So that's very interesting. So when you think of gold, think of Ghana, the Ghanaian Empire. And a lot of the practices of the Ghanaian Empire are actually linked to the practices of ancient Egypt. So it kind of makes you kind of wonder if the Ghanaian empires were practicing had practices similar to ancient Egypt, are there some sort of correlations in terms of peoples? That's something that I don't think he never really explored too much of, but that's something that I would love to learn more about, just the Ghanaian Empire and its correlation with ancient Egypt. I think that'd be very cool. However, he does have like a map where he shows the migration patterns throughout ancient Africa. And actually, when I look at the ancient Egyptians, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. They said that the ancient Egyptians moved north. So I believe that Sudan is on top of Egypt. We're just gonna go on maps quickly to make sure. But yeah, no, ancient Egypt is I believe that Sudan is above Egypt. So if that were to be correct, no, Sudan is below Egypt. Hmm. So I don't know. So maybe there is no correlation between the Ghanaian Empire and ancient Egypt because here it states that the Egyptians moved north. So if they moved north, then that would be present day. That would be present day. Give me one second. I just want to see. That would be present day. That would be present day Greece. So somewhere in the Mediterranean is what he is alluding to. Yeah. So yeah. And we have the Ashanti tribe. Yeah, so I don't know. But if the Ghanaian Empire, well, they controlled Sudan, and Sudan does have pyramids. So, and I do know that ancient Nubia was part of Sudan. So maybe there is some correlation there. I'm not sure, but yeah, so he does say that the Ghanaian Empire does have Egyptian practices, which is cool. So now it's just having to explore that even more, and to see really to zoom in on that and to see whether or not, any if there's any sort of, you know, correlation between Egyptian royalty and the Ghanaian Empire, or if there's any correlation between just Egyptian people in the Ghanaian Empire. Um, that'd be something very interesting to see and to learn about, and to also to see the correlation between modern day, not modern day, but ancient day Sudan and ancient Egypt, because Egypt had pyramids, so did Sudan. There's pyramids also in Mexico. And it's funny because I remember when I went to Mexico, the guide was explaining that Africans actually traveled to Mexico through, like, they walked through the forest with the Mayans. And so clearly the Africans were the ones that were sharing the architecture of the pyramids. So that'd be something cool. So yeah, this book, like I said, really gives you a good foundation of ancient Africa, but however, there's still more things that need to be studied more by Black scholars, so there's no racial bias. To really see the correlation between the Ghanaian Empire, Sudan, and modern day Egypt. And I think that would really give some truth behind ancient Egypt, ancient Africa, so that way that there is no confusion on who the ancient Egyptians were, and any confusion on some of the reigning empires in that day, in addition to the Egyptian empire, because that's one of the many great empires of Africa. So that was very cool too. But I want to also note that even though the Ghanaian Empire was so vast, it did eventually get conquered. So they were weakened by the Susu attacks. So in 1242, king of the exterior province of Mali eventually seized it. So I don't spend a lot of time on Mali. Mali had a lot of Islam influence, but yeah, for I when you read the book, you can focus on the Mali Empire because he does provide a lot of information on the Mali Empire and its political, economical, and social landscape, which is pretty interesting as well. I just wanted to focus in on the Ghanaian Empire because this is a Ghanaian top that I'm wearing. My mom went to Ghana the other day to see some of our ancestral roots. She's currently doing her PhD um, at the University of Toronto, so I'm super proud of her. And she went to Ghana and she got me this, this top. So I just thought I would wear it, and just since I was focusing in on the Ghanaian Empire. So yeah, that is pretty much my review of pre-colonial Black Africa. Overall, it was great. The only thing that I did not like about this book, and please don't, you know, tear me up in the comments, but I just feel like there was a lot of focus on Islam, and Islam being, the main contributing factor to ancient Africa having an educational system and all these things. But at the same time, I also wish that he took more time to really study ancient languages, study ancient um, educational systems that um, are outside of Islam or the Arabs. And I think that would be also cool to note too. I just felt like there's a lot of praise for the Arabs in Islam for, taking for their role in ancient Africa's educational system, which I don't want to believe is fact, because there's definitely educational systems in Africa that existed outside of that. So I would have wished that he focused on that some more. Um, Other than that, the book, like I said, is a great way to start your knowledge on learning about ancient Africa. I wouldn't say that this book is going to give you every single detail for you to know the ins and outs of ancient pre-colonial Africa, but it's a great start. Um, and if you're interested in learning more, like I am, about the Ghanaian Empire, its correlation with Sudan and ancient Egypt, then this book will definitely inspire you to do further research on ancient Africa to learn how our ancestors lived. And I think it would really inspire you to see how different we're living, and maybe inspire you to even want to live like that outside of like Western society, Western capitalism. So, yeah, overall, the book was great. It was not written in an academic language, which was exhausting, and you had to like go on Google and find the definition of a word. It was definitely a very easy read, very, very thorough, but very surface. He doesn't get into too much depths, but just enough for you to have a good understanding of what pre-colonial Black Africa looked like. And for that, I would say that this book is definitely a must read because it definitely gauges you and hopefully it will inspire you to do further research on ancient Africa. So overall, love the book by Cheikh Anta Diop. I'm happy that I bought it. To me, it was a personal investment. I need to know where I'm from. I need to know what my ancestors look like. And I'm not going to feel bad about it. I'm proud of it. And I'm proud of the vastness of ancient Africa. I'm proud that, poverty never existed in ancient Africa and that my ancestors lived a life of abundance. And for that, I left this book feeling extremely proud. So I hope you read this book and also feel extremely proud about your ancestry. And yeah, let me know what you guys think about the pre-colonial Black Africa. I loved it, and it's a great conversation starter for sure. If this is what you're interested in reading, of course. But yeah, if you want to know who you are and your ancestors, read Pre-Colonial Black Africa by Cheikh Anta Diop. Must read. So now we are going to transition to my favorite segment of the day.
Today's literary.
Dirty Drunkro.
A
Drunkro.
literary drunk row goes to a man that was arrested following the death of a worker at a warehouse. According to the BBC, in an article titled Arrest After Worker Dies at Book Warehouse, a 23-year-old died after reports of an industrial accident at Hachette UK Distribution's warehouse. A spokesperson for the firm, which warehouses books for more than 30 publishers, said the incident heartbreakingly led to the loss of a much-loved colleague. Now, they didn't get too much detail about what transpired, but if this man was arrested following the death of a worker, he deserves drunk row of the day. Now, I don't know what was said or done to this man who got arrested, but it doesn't matter because regardless, someone doesn't deserve to lose their life because of what was said or done to this person. Now, this is all allegedly because I don't know if this person killed him. I'm just assuming. But regardless, he is going to get junk row of the day. Now, that is really it. That was just my junk row. Yeah. And it's funny because I was trying to find things that were going on in the world, which I felt, no, this incident is not funny. Let's just make that very clear. What I'm saying, what is funny was that I was trying to look, and then all of a sudden I just got this article, and mind you, I was very upset when I read the article. But again, everything's alleged because there's not too much details of what happened and the guy who got arrested, what his role was in the death of this young man. So we shall see what happens. Regardless, he is going to get today's drunk row of the day.